The year is 1914. It is an age of heroes, an age of bold exploration. The world's great blank spaces are shrinking. The North Pole has been claimed, the South Pole too. But one great journey remains, the last great prize of polar exploration: to cross the vast, frozen continent of Antarctica on foot. This is the dream of one man, Sir Ernest Shackleton. He is a veteran of the ice, a leader forged in the crucible of the South. His ambition is simple, yet monumental: to march from the Weddell Sea, across the pole, to the Ross Sea, nearly 2,000 miles, through the most hostile environment on Earth, a place of unimaginable cold and brutal, unending wind. His vessel is named Endurance. It is a ship built for this very purpose, a Norwegian marvel of wood and iron. Its hull is thick, its frame reinforced, designed to withstand the immense pressure of the polar ice. Aboard this ship, a crew of 27 men has been carefully chosen. They are sailors, scientists, adventurers. Each man possesses a unique skill. They all share one vital quality, a spirit of determination. They have placed their trust in their leader, Shackleton. They are ready to face the unknown. They are ready to etch their names into the annals of history, to conquer the final frontier for the British Empire. The mood is one of profound optimism. Crowds gather at the docks to wave them off. Flags fly high. The expedition is a national event, a symbol of courage and human aspiration. As the Endurance pulls away from the shore, the men look towards the horizon, their minds filled with visions of glory. They imagine planting the Union Jack at the end of their long march. They dream of the triumphant return, of parades and accolades. They are setting sail not just on a ship, but on a wave of hope. They believe their journey will be a story of conquest, a testament to man's power over nature. But the Antarctic has other plans for them. This expedition was never destined to be about crossing a continent. The story that would unfold would be far more dramatic. It would become a legend not of geographical triumph, but of human survival against impossible odds. The names that would become famous were not just Shackleton's and his crews, but also the places that would test their will to live. The treacherous Weddell Sea, the desolate shores of Elephant Island, the distant, storm-battered peaks of South Georgia. Their journey would not be a straight line across the ice, but a twisted, desperate path dictated by forces far beyond their control. This is the story of that journey. The plan was meticulously crafted. It was born from years of polar experience and careful study. Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition would be a two-pronged assault on the continent. The Endurance would carry the main party, including Shackleton himself, into the Weddell Sea. This was a notoriously dangerous body of water, known for its heavy, unpredictable pack ice. They would land a shore party which would then begin the long overland trek. Meanwhile, the Aurora would sail to the opposite side of Antarctica, the Ross Sea. Its mission was to lay supply depots along the final stages of the route for Shackleton's team to use. The Endurance sailed south from Buenos Aires in late 1914. Initial signs were promising. The ship performed beautifully, cutting through the open ocean with grace and power. The men settled into routines, camaraderie, and shared purpose filled the wooden vessel. They were a band of brothers, confident in their ship, confident in their leader. The first whispers of trouble came from the whaling stations on South Georgia, their last port of call. The old sea dogs, men who knew the southern waters better than anyone, spoke of a bad ice year. An unusually cold season had allowed the sea ice to extend much farther north than normal. Shackleton listened to the warnings, but he was not a man to be easily deterred. Delaying for a year was an option, but it was not one he wished to take. The expedition's momentum was strong, its funding secured. he made the fateful decision to press on. He would trust in the strength of his ship and the skill of his crew to navigate the challenges ahead. On December 5, 1914, the Endurance weighed anchor and steamed south, leaving the last vestiges of civilization behind. It plunged into the lonely, icy expanse of the Southern Ocean, heading directly for the Weddell Sea. The air grew colder. The sky turned a metallic gray. The first icebergs appeared, ghostly white mountains drifting in a dark sea. The optimism that had filled the ship began to be tempered by a stark reality. The ice was indeed heavy. At first, it was just slush and small floes, which the Endurance could push aside with ease. But soon, the floes grew larger, the channels between them narrower. The ship's progress slowed from a steady pace to a crawl. The constant crunch and grind of ice against the hull became the new soundtrack of their lives. They were not yet trapped, but they were entangled. Each day, the crew looked to their leader, their faith unwavering. Shackleton remained a pillar of calm, his presence a constant reassurance. Yet, even he must have felt a growing unease as the white maze of the Weddell Sea slowly, inexorably, began to close around his ship. The northern gale blew for days, a relentless, invisible force. Its effect on the sea ice was dramatic and devastating. It compressed the fractured field of floes into a single, seamless plain of white. The narrow channels of open water vanished, squeezed shut by immense pressure. The Endurance, which had been fighting forward, now found itself held fast. Engines at full power, the reinforced bow smashing against the ice, desperate to break free. But it was no use. Ice too thick, pressure too great. The ship shuddered. It could not move, like a fly caught in a spider's web. On January 19, 1915, the steam was let down from the boilers. The engines fell silent. An eerie quiet descended, broken by the mournful cry of the wind and the faint, grinding groan of the ice. Beset, trapped. The crew looked out from the deck at the endless, unbroken vista of white. The continent was still visible, a faint, shimmering line less than 100 miles away. So close, yet utterly unreachable. The ship that had been their vehicle of conquest was now their prison. No longer masters of their destiny, adrift on the slow-moving ice pack of the Weddell Sea. Shackleton's initial reaction, measured calm. This was a setback, he told the men, but not a disaster. He had been beset before. Often, a change in wind or current could open the ice as quickly as it closed. They would wait, patient and ready. He ordered routine to continue. Watches were kept. Decks were scrubbed. Scientific observations recorded. Discipline was crucial. It kept men occupied, focused on tasks, not the uncertainty. He knew the greatest enemy, not the ice, but despair. Days turned into weeks. The hoped-for southerly wind never came. The ship and its ice floe drifted slowly, not south, but north and west, carried by the great gyre of the Weddell Sea. Captain Worsley marked their slow, meandering path on charts. They were moving farther from the land they had fought to reach. Initial hope faded, replaced by grim acceptance. Antarctic winter fast approaching. The sun dipped lower each day, not trapped for a week or a month, trapped for the entire winter. The end for the Endurance was not swift. It was a slow, agonizing execution that stretched over weeks. Throughout October 1915, the ice that had held them for 9 months began to move with terrifying violence. The sounds were a torment to the soul, a symphony of destruction, a cacophony of deep, resonant groans, a high-pitched shriek of splintering planks. Men lying in their bunks in perpetual half-light listened as their home was torn apart. It was the sound of their world collapsing, plank by plank. The pressure was relentless. It did not just squeeze the ship, it twisted it. The 300-ton vessel was lifted bodily upwards, its stern pushed clear of the ice, its bow driven down. Icy black water began to seep into the holds, then pour in. The pumps were manned around the clock, a futile effort. On October 27, 1915, the final mortal blow was struck. A massive pressure wave surged through the pack, explosive reports that sounded like artillery fire. The ship's main timbers snapped, the stern post, the backbone, was ripped away. The ship was broken. Shackleton watched with a stoic exterior. He gathered the men on the buckling deck. He looked at their faces, etched with exhaustion and fear. His voice was steady, calm. He gave the order to abandon ship. The men moved with practiced, somber efficiency. They lowered the James Caird, they lowered the Dudley Docker, they lowered the Stancomb Wills. They scrambled to salvage everything they could. Each man allowed 2 pounds of personal gear, leaving behind home, comfort, last link to the world. Stepping off the ship onto a sheet of drifting ice, their journey of survival had truly begun. With the Endurance now a shattered ruin, the 28 men established their first home on the ice. They called it Ocean Camp. The first few nights were a brutal shock. They had known ship warmth and security. Now they lay in frozen sleeping bags on the ice, the cold seeping into their bones. Shackleton knew their only hope was land. He formulated a plan. They would march across the ice, dragging the heavy lifeboats and essential supplies. Their target was Paulet Island, 350 miles away. On October 30th, 3 days after abandoning ship, they began their trek. It was a Herculean effort. The march was a disaster. After 2 days, less than 2 miles from the wreck, Shackleton decided the march was impossible. He ordered a halt. They would pitch a new, more permanent camp and wait. They would let the ice drift north toward open water. They would live on the ice until it broke up beneath them. As the Antarctic summer progressed into 1916, the character of their frozen world began to change. The sun, now higher in the sky for longer periods, began to have a noticeable effect on the ice. The greatest threat came from the cracks. Long, dark fissures would suddenly appear in the ice, sometimes running directly through their camp. On one occasion, a crack opened up directly beneath one of the tents while the men were sleeping inside. They were living on a disintegrating jigsaw puzzle. The integrity of their flow was compromised. Shackleton watched the deteriorating ice with a keen eye. He knew their time on the floe was coming to an end. He ordered the men to prepare the 3 lifeboats for a sea voyage. On the night of April 8th, the final crisis began. A huge swell, born from a distant storm, rolled into the pack. Their floe began to break apart beneath them. The next morning, April 9th, 1916, Shackleton looked at the shattered floe and the angry grey sea. There was no more waiting. He gave the order to launch the boats. For 497 days they had been on or in the ice. Now they committed themselves to the water. 28 men in 3 small boats, surrounded by a hostile sea. The moment they left the relative shelter of the ice pack and entered the open sea, the full fury of the Southern Ocean was unleashed upon them. The waves grew to monstrous size, towering walls of water that threatened to swamp the tiny boats with every crest. The men had to bail constantly, their hands raw and numb, just to keep from being swamped. The voyage to Elephant Island became a blur of misery. The men were crammed together, unable to stretch or move. Thirst became a torment. Their fresh water was strictly rationed, a few sips a day. Navigation was a nightmare. Frank Worsley, the brilliant navigator, had the critical task of finding Elephant Island. The fate of all 28 men rested on his ability to make these near-impossible calculations. The sea spray froze instantly on everything it touched. The boats became encased in ice. The added weight made them sluggish and unstable, threatening to capsize them.
On the fifth night, Shackleton, who had been at the tiller for hours, saw a strange white line on the horizon. It was not a cloud. It was the breaking crest of a colossal rogue wave. He screamed a warning. "For God's sake, hold on! It's got us!"
The wave struck with the force of an explosion. Miraculously, the James Caird, a testament to its design and construction, shook itself free. After 7 nightmarish days at sea, on the morning of April 15th, through a gap in the swirling mist and snow, came a cry from the bow. Land in sight. But their trial was not yet over. The island was a fortress of rock and ice. For 2 more days they beat back and forth along the coast, searching for a beach, strength failing with every hour. Finally, Worsley spotted a small, narrow spit of rock and shingle. It was their only chance. With the last of their strength, the men rowed towards it. The men stumbled out of the boats and onto solid ground for the first time in 497 days. They had made it. They had survived the ice. They had survived the ocean. They were alive. But the euphoria faded and a grim reality set in. They had reached land, but they were not saved. Marooned, hundreds of miles from any shipping lane, completely cut off. Shackleton surveyed his men. They were hollowed-out shells of their former selves. He knew that waiting for rescue was not an option. No one in the outside world knew where they were. He understood that their survival depended on one last, desperate gamble. He gathered his men amidst the howling wind. He laid out the brutal truth of their situation. Then, he announced his plan. He would take one of the lifeboats, the James Caird. He would select a small crew, and he would attempt to sail across 800 miles of the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the planet, the Southern Ocean, to the island of South Georgia. It was a voyage that seasoned sailors in fully rigged ships would fear. He proposed to do it in a 22-foot open boat. Yet not a single man questioned the decision. They saw their only hope. For the boat journey, Shackleton needed specific skills. Frank Worsley, navigator; Tom Crean, the indomitable Irishman; John Vincent, seasoned seaman; Timothy McCarthy, seasoned seaman; Harry McNish, the ship's carpenter. McNish was tasked with making the James Caird seaworthy. He built a makeshift deck and canvas and wood covering. April 24, 1916, 9 days after they had landed, the James Caird was ready. The men staying behind helped push the boat into the surf. 6 men sailed toward a sliver of hope and almost certain death. 22 men stood on shore facing an unknown fate. The men on the beach gave 3 cheers as the James Caird pulled away. After 16 days at sea, on the morning of May 8th, they sighted South Georgia. But their ordeal was far from over. Another storm bore down on them. Finally, they found an inlet, King Haakon Bay, and steered the battered James Caird onto a rocky beach. They had arrived on the wrong side of the island, separated from the whaling stations by a treacherous, uncharted mountain range of glaciers and peaks. Shackleton chose the 2 fittest men to accompany him, the indomitable Tom Crean and the brilliant navigator Frank Worsley. On May 19th, 1916, under the light of a full moon, the 3 men set off. As night fell, they found themselves at the top of a high pass. Too exhausted to climb down, Shackleton made a bold, life-or-death decision. They would slide. They pushed off into the abyss. After 36 hours without sleep, they were on the verge of total collapse. As the dawn broke, they heard a sound. It was the sound of a steam whistle. It was the 7 a.m. whistle from the Stromness whaling station. The 3 men were a terrifying sight. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. The central figure, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with intensity, answered simply, "My name is Shackleton." Shackleton, after a hot bath and a proper meal, did not rest. His mind was already on the 22 men he had left behind. His first attempt was thwarted by the impenetrable pack ice. A second attempt failed. A third attempt also failed. On Elephant Island, Frank Wild held his men together. He told them every morning, "The boss may come today." Finally, on August 30th, 1916, on his fourth attempt, Shackleton found a way through. Aboard a small Chilean steam tug named Yelcho, he approached the coast of Elephant Island. Through his binoculars, he saw a small figure on the beach. He counted 1, 2, 3. He counted all 22. They were all there. They were all alive. Shackleton stood on the bow and shouted across the water, "Are you all well?" The answer came back across the waves, "All safe, all well." After almost 2 years of unimaginable hardship, every single one of the 28 men of the Endurance expedition had been saved. Not a life was lost. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition failed in its stated goal. The continent was not crossed. The ship was lost. By every conventional measure of exploration, the venture was a complete and utter failure. But the story of the Endurance did not become a footnote of polar failure. Instead, it became one of the greatest legends of human history. It is a raw, elemental tale of survival against all odds. The name Endurance, chosen for the ship, became the defining characteristic of the men themselves. They endured because they were led. Sir Ernest Shackleton's leadership was the force that turned a potential tragedy into a triumph of life. He manufactured hope when all was hopeless. They were saved not by a single hero, but by a collective act of courage. Each man played his part. They proved that the true measure of success is not in the glory of conquest, but in the profound value of bringing every single person home alive. And so, we are left with the stark, enduring images. A shattered ship swallowed by a frozen sea, a tiny boat battling a monstrous ocean, 3 ragged figures stumbling out of an uncharted wilderness, and 28 souls pulled back from the brink of oblivion. The story of the Endurance serves as a timeless reminder. It shows that in the face of nature's most overwhelming power, the most formidable force of all is the quiet, stubborn, and unbreakable resilience of life itself. The will to live, the will to endure, and the will to never, ever give up.